Hello, folks. Officer Tony here. Get a load of this set. Yeah, retro. It's like when we first started the channel 20 years ago. Or maybe it was 20 months ago. It only feels like 20 years. Anyway, today's video is about backing tracks. Yeah, stay tuned and watch the craptacular crapfest crappy video.
Hello, Richard from budgetguitarist.com. I'm very well lit today. There's a very bright light right over there and it's shining directly in my eyes. Today we're going to talk about backing tracks and why, if you are a solo performer, meaning you gig without a band, why you might want to consider backing tracks and what the benefits are and how to use them and how to get them and all that kind of jazz. So I've put together a little presentation which I'm going to walk you through. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments section. And here we go. So let's talk about backing tracks. What are backing tracks? Well, a backing track is used by a solo performing musician where instead of just singing with acoustic guitar, there's a recording for each song that has usually like drums and bass on it. And so you're playing along with pre-recorded tracks to simulate the sound of a band. This presentation will discuss 4 things: why you might want to use backing tracks, some things to consider, how to get or make backing tracks, and some tips. And I actually think I'm going to do this in a different order, so apologies. Okay, so why backing tracks? Doesn't it sound stupid? Isn't it corny? Isn't it like karaoke? Isn't it cheating? Why don't you just get a real band? You're a loser, blah, 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 blah. All right. Here's the thing. If you want to go out and perform all by yourself, in Florida, where I live at least, it's very common for solo performers to have backing tracks. The biggest reason for this is that there's a lot of places that want to provide live entertainment, but they can't afford $500 to $3,000 for a band. But what they can afford is they can afford to pay you $150 to come in and play for 3 hours. And so by using backing tracks, a single solo performer can sound more exciting, sound more like a band, sound more interesting. Because here's the truth of the matter, and I hope nobody gets too mad at me. If you're Tommy Emmanuel, you can entertain a crowd for 2 hours with your acoustic. But there aren't too many solo performers who can sing and play acoustic guitar for 2 or 3 hours and hold an audience's attention. That's just how it is. After a couple of songs, people will tune you out in a lot of cases. Now, I have gone out and performed with just my guitar and voice, and the fact of the matter is, when people hear the same thing, the same orchestration over and over and over and over again, they tend to tune it out. This is why even with a band, a 4 or 5 piece band, you'll see them doing songs where, like in the middle of their set, they'll break it down and do some acoustic songs. It's all about change and variety. In this day and age, people, they don't have long attention spans and stuff gets old quick. So backing tracks is a really good way to avoid people tuning you out because you're singing with your acoustic. Next, you can charge more money. This is the thing. This is actually a hypothetical. There are plenty of exceptions to this. There are plenty of people who go out and with just their piano or just their acoustic guitar, they make a lot of money and they entertain people. And that's great and more power to them. But if you have backing tracks and you come in and you can replace an entire band, well, then you should be paid for replacing an entire band. Now, obviously, they're not going to pay you like a band, but it adds value. So you should be able to charge more because you're adding more value. In some cases, this is expected. I've actually seen bars and like little small bars where they expect people to come in with a backing track. And so that's something to kind of check out. There's also some places where they don't want you to have a backing track. So in part 1 of this series, I talked about doing your homework. Go watch a bunch of acts at the venue you want to go to. Are any of them using backing tracks? If no, well, when you pitch yourself for the gig, pitch that you can use backing tracks and it's more exciting for the listeners. This may or may not be controversial, I don't know. Most professional bands, like pop bands especially, are definitely using backing tracks, and that's because modern audiences want acts to sound just like the CD, right? Their expectations are a lot higher now than they were 30 years ago. And so you go see almost anybody in the pop realm, and they're going to have backing tracks. And then finally, down the road, if you're using backing tracks, if you get them on a computer, now all of a sudden you can do automation. You can automate guitar changes, patch changes, keyboard patch changes. You can even program your lights to go along with each song. That's the really cool stuff. I'm going to get into that in the next video. You don't have to do that, but it's nice to know that down the road you could. Okay, so how do you get these backing tracks? Well, 3 ways. You can buy them. You can make them from MIDI files that you download, or you can make your own. Let's talk about each of those options. If you want to buy backing tracks, just Google buy backing tracks, and you're going to find sites like this one, or like this one, or like this one, or like this one. This is the easiest way to generate backing tracks. If you don't have a computer digital audio workstation, you're not familiar with mixing music, this is the way you're going to get your backing tracks. Now it's going to cost money, and you definitely need to shop around. And something to think about, don't just download the backing track for Elton John's Daniel in whatever key it happens to be in, and then realize you can't sing it in that key. The best websites that will allow you to download backing tracks will let you choose the key, the tempo, and the instruments. There are some really good ones out there. I tend to favor backing tracks with just drums and bass and nothing else. And I tend to transpose all my songs because I'm a bass. I'm not even a real baritone. I can fake baritone. Most pop music is written for baritones and altos. So when you're exploring paying for some backing tracks, make sure you're buying from a site that will give you that flexibility. Figure out what key you want to sing the song in. Figure out what instruments you want. And then go someplace where you can custom generate the backing track like that. That's a really good tip. If you don't want to pay, there are tons and tons of free MIDI files out there. Using Elton John's Daniel as an example, there's 3 or 4 different MIDI files for Daniel. Now, if you've got a computer and a digital audio workstation and you know a way around drum samples and instruments and stuff, you can download MIDI files, load them into your DAW, and make your own backing tracks. There are some paid MIDI files out there that they've already done all the hard work for you. But I think the key reason to go this route is the free ones. There are all kinds of free MIDI tracks out there. So here's the concept. You're going to download the MIDI file, load it into Logic Pro or GarageBand or Studio One or Cubase or whatever. And you're not just going to let it use the stock general MIDI default sounds. You're going to pull up your favorite drum kit. You're going to pull up your favorite bass patch. And then you're going to go in and you're going to remove all the instruments except for the drum and bass, maybe some keyboards. That part's up to you. And then you're going to mix it down to a stereo audio file. And then you'll have your backing track. If you save that MIDI file, save it in your Logic Pro, Studio One, whatever, then later if you decide you want to remix it and do something different, transpose it, you've still got the original MIDI file. This is a really good approach. Now, you can also make your own backing tracks. And that would be where you record some drums or use drum samples, you record yourself playing bass, you record the backing track yourself. You make it whatever key, whatever tempo you want. A few tips. Sometimes you can download like a MIDI file as just a starting point. Even if you end up replacing everything in it, it's usually got something close to the original drums that you can kind of go in and modify, and it'll be the right length and it'll have the chorus in the right spots, etc. What I've done sometimes is downloaded one of these and then I swapped out the MIDI bass line for me playing real bass. So here's a tip. In all of your backing tracks, keep it lean, right? I like bass and drums. And get rid of as much reverb as possible. This does require a lot of work and the ability to record your own tracks, but sometimes this can yield the best results. Okay, things to consider. So when you're thinking about getting or making a track, here are some things. The key of the song I already mentioned, whether you're going to download an audio backing track or MIDI, the instruments in the track. One thing to consider is you don't need a backing track for every song in your sets. It's a really good idea to mix it up. Remember, variety so that people don't get bored. If they're hearing the same MIDI drum song after song after song after song, well, you're not really accomplishing anything. You're still boring people. So, fourth song in, just play acoustic guitar and sing and forget the backing track. Variety. You may come across some MIDI tracks that have got a click in it or vocal cues, and especially in the praise and worship market, they do a lot of this because they're dealing with musicians who need a lot of direction. It's up to you whether you want to use in-ear monitors and have like a click in your ear all night. Personally, I can't stand that, nor would I want somebody talking to me telling me when the verses are. Your mileage may vary. And of course, we already talked about what instruments to include. So what I do, 90% of the time, I just want the bass and the drums. I don't want extra keyboards. I don't want extra guitar. The more instruments you have, the faker it sounds, the more it starts to sound like karaoke. I already mentioned the fact that you don't need it for every song. So less reverb on the tracks is also better. Okay? Now, I wrote controversial on there. I already talked about the click and verbal cues. Like, these are things that a lot of professionals do, and I still don't understand it. I'm a musician. If I can't play along with a drum track, and I need a click track in my ear all night, ugh, I shudder to think of what that means. But if you need one, I guess I just insulted you, and I apologize for that. Where was I? Yeah, so my approach really is to try to simulate a band as much as I possibly can. And so a real band would have a drum set on stage, and they mic the bass drum, they mic the snare. That mic goes into the mixing desk. The snare drum itself doesn't have any reverb. What's going off the stage is bone dry. Then the sound engineer might add a little bit of reverb, but often in a live situation, they don't need to because there's reverb in the room. If you come out with a backing track where the drums are soaked in reverb and there's 10 other instruments on it, you will sound like karaoke. Now, maybe you don't mind, but I think you're better off trying to actually sound like a band. So I think these points are really, really important, and I have a few more to make. Leave your amp at home. So this one would be more controversial than the click. Guitar players, we love our amplifiers, right? But here's the deal. You've got everything, including your voice, coming through the PA, your PA, and then you're going to have this guitar amp off to the side that's making a lot of sound. Even if you mic it up, it's still going to be sound. And what it's going to sound like is it's going to sound like you playing guitar along with a CD. And that's not what you want. You want your guitar to be mixed in correctly with all the other instruments. So, okay, technically, if you had some kind of a crate that you could put your amp in and mic it up and close the crate, well, why would you do that for like a local bar gig? It makes so much more sense to use like a Boss GT100, a GT1000, or a Pod Pro. I use an HX Stomp, any kind of digital modeling system. Then your guitar will be coming through the PA just like the drums, just like your voice, just like the bass, and it's all going to sound like one thing, like one band. So you're going to be practicing for gigs, probably in your house, and you're going to mix it a certain way. But what's going to happen is when you get to an actual gig and you crank your PA system up, you might suddenly discover that your levels are not very good. So it's always a good idea to every once in a while practice at gig volume. So you could do it when nobody's home or go to a practice facility, a friend's house. That's what's going to give you a really good idea in terms of how it should be mixed. Using a subwoofer is a great idea if you've got backing tracks with drums. The biggest difference between karaoke and a live band in terms of sound quality is when you see a live band, you know what the bass drum sounds like. It sounds massive, right? You can feel it in your stomach. Sometimes you can feel it in your throat if it's loud enough. You're probably not going to be doing that at the bar, but if your bass drum has a lot of low frequencies that are very powerful to it, and people will notice that. They will definitely notice that. And it's going to take you from the realm of your backing track sounding like a CD to sounding even more like a real band. Real bands use 18-inch subwoofers that weigh 120 pounds. You can get a 12-inch subwoofer. I prefer EV. So you can get an EV 12-inch subwoofer. You can buy them used if you shop around. And that's a really good tip. I already banged on and on about having some variety. You don't need a backing track on every song, right? And then finally, let's say you're doing backing tracks for your own original music. And let's say you get to the point where you're actually going to open up for somebody in a club and there's going to be 800 people there. If you're at that level, then your backing tracks probably need to be a lot better than what I'm talking about. You probably need to have stems. And so that would be where the bass is on one track, and maybe you've got one track that's stereo drums. Maybe you've even got like the bass drum and the kick drum and all that stuff separate. But at a minimum, having a more sophisticated mixing board where you could send out the sound engineer. You'd say, I got tracks for bass, drums, guitar, vocals, and they're all separate. They will definitely, well, they'll feel like you're a professional instead of an amateur. So I just wanted to mention that. So those were a bunch of ideas. I know I just fire hosed you with all this knowledge. You can pause the video, you can go back. I'm still in the process of learning myself. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, please put them in the comments area. And next week, we're going to get into automation. We're going to get into like the really cool stuff. So where you've got your backing tracks on a computer and your computer is also automatically changing patches for you and synchronizing your lights. That's going to be a fun one. So there you go. That was a discussion of backing tracks, and I definitely use them, and I like to use them and then not use them. Part of what I do live is I like to try to vary things as much as I can. So I play keyboards. No, honestly, I do. Watch. See, I really do know how to play. So I play keyboards and sing, and I play guitar and sing. And so I've got keyboards alone, keyboards with backing tracks, guitar alone, guitar with backing tracks. Sometimes in one song I'll play keyboards and then I'll do a guitar solo and go back to keyboards. And the whole idea is just kind of mixing things up. But we're going to talk about that more next week, in next week videos. In the meantime, if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. And I appreciate you. And subscribe if you want to. And I will see you again next Friday at 5.